She came to Dubai chasing stability, but a wealthy businessman saw in her a secret escape from his loveless marriage. When his glamorous wife uncovered the affair, love turned into a weapon sharper than any knife. What kind of revenge can a betrayed woman engineer that leaves both her husband and his Filipina secretary fighting for their lives? Marissa Dela Cruz had always believed that education was the only way out of the narrow alleys of Quezon City. As the eldest of three, she grew up in a household where survival depended on her mother's stall in the wet market and her father's sporadic earnings from tricycle driving, when his health allowed it. Nights were often lit by candles when electricity bills went unpaid, and the scent of damp laundry filled their two-room home. She dreamed of more, not for herself alone, but for her family who looked to her as the anchor. By the time she was 16, she was already working part-time jobs while finishing her studies, mastering the rhythm of exhaustion, deadlines, and responsibility. After graduating with a degree in business administration, she knew staying in the Philippines meant endless struggle. Secretarial work barely covered the cost of transportation and rice, let alone her father's growing medical expenses. The recruitment agency in Manila offered her a lifeline, a secretarial position in Dubai at an international trading company. The contract promised housing, airfare, and a salary that dwarfed anything she could make at home. For her family, it sounded like a miracle. She took the job without hesitation, telling herself she could endure the loneliness of distance if it meant her younger siblings stayed in school. On May 14, 2019, she landed in Dubai. The city's steel and glass skyline felt like another planet compared to the rust-streaked shacks of her neighborhood. It dazzled her, but it also overwhelmed. She reminded herself that she was not here to marvel. She was here to work, to send money home, to make sure her father's insulin never ran out again. Her first weeks at the trading firm were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and learning to navigate the strict hierarchy of the office. She was diligent, arriving before anyone else, staying until the corridors were empty, rarely speaking except when necessary. Her professionalism caught the attention of her colleagues, but it caught the eye of one man in particular. Khalid Al-Mansouri was not just her employer. He was one of Dubai's most well-known developers, his name attached to high-rise projects, luxury villas, and commercial centers across the city. To Marissa, he was just another figure in the hierarchy, someone she typed letters for and scheduled meetings on behalf of. But to him, she was something unexpected, a woman who didn't melt under his gaze or stumble over her words in his presence. While other employees exaggerated their politeness, Marissa was efficient, clear, and unshaken by his reputation. Khalid's world was defined by wealth, but inside his mansion in Emirates Hills, his marriage was eroding in silence. His wife, Layla, had been his partner for 20 years. A striking woman whose beauty was matched only by her ability to manage the demands of elite society. She had stood by him at every gala, hosted dinner parties that secured business deals, and raised his children with grace. But she had also endured a steady trail of humiliations, flirtations with assistants, quiet affairs with models, the hushed whispers that followed her in social circles. She absorbed it all because in their world, divorce meant disgrace, and disgrace meant exile. When Khalid began lingering at Marissa's desk, asking small questions about her life, no one thought much of it. But Marissa noticed. She noticed how his tone softened when he asked about her family, how he remembered the name of her youngest brother, how he praised her diligence without crossing professional lines. She didn't see him as a man offering power. She saw him as a person paying attention to her existence in a city that otherwise ignored her. She resisted at first. She had heard stories from other Filipinas, maids, nurses, receptionists, about men who offered the world but delivered heartbreak. She told herself she would not be like them, that she would not allow her family's future to rest on the whims of someone else's affection. Yet when Khalid began to share pieces of his own life, speaking of loneliness despite his wealth, of feeling trapped in a cold marriage, something in her began to shift. She knew it was dangerous, but the warmth of being seen in a city of strangers was hard to resist. Layla, meanwhile, noticed changes in her husband's routine. He was distracted at dinners, his phone buzzing with messages he guarded closely, his late nights suddenly explained as urgent meetings. She had endured before, but endurance had become suffocating. This time felt different, heavier, as though he were not simply seeking diversion, but weaving something lasting. Quietly, she began to prepare. Khalid's pursuit of Marissa was slow and deliberate. He never cornered her, never made crude remarks. Instead, he presented himself as patient, understanding, even vulnerable. He asked her about her father's health, offered to help with medical costs, though she declined at first out of pride. He remembered the details she shared, her brother's upcoming exams, her mother's small vegetable stall, and repeated them back with a tenderness that disarmed her. It wasn't the gifts or the promises that broke through her walls, but the illusion of someone powerful caring about the small burdens that consumed her thoughts. By July, their conversations had grown longer, stretching beyond office hours. She stayed late to finish documents, and he appeared with coffee, pretending to work, but mostly talking. He told her about his first failed project, about how money could never buy genuine companionship, about the suffocating expectations of his family. She listened, and in listening, began to feel tethered to him. For the first time since arriving in Dubai, she felt less invisible. The transition from professional to personal was almost imperceptible. A hand brushed hers when passing papers. A compliment lingered a second too long. A late-night meeting ended with Khalid offering to drive her home, the silence in the car filled with unspoken words. When he finally confessed that he wanted more than a working relationship, she felt torn between fear and desire. She reminded him he was married. He assured her his marriage was hollow, a contract without affection. He promised that with time, he could change everything. Meanwhile, Layla's suspicions crystallized into certainty. She had learned long ago that confronting Khalid directly would only lead to dismissals and denials. Instead, she relied on methods far more effective: observation and documentation. Through discreet contacts, she had cameras installed in his office, a tracker hidden in his car, and software quietly duplicating his emails. Each day, her private archive grew. Marissa leaving late at night, Khalid sending unexplained transfers labeled as bonuses, photographs of them entering a serviced apartment together. But Layla wasn't satisfied with proof of an affair. Proof alone would not protect her reputation or her children's future. She needed a narrative that showed her as the victim and Marissa as the predator. Slowly, she began editing the files, removing Khalid's advances and leaving only Marissa's hesitant smiles, her reluctant acceptance of gifts, her presence in the apartment. The story she crafted was not of a wealthy man exploiting a secretary, but of a calculating woman exploiting a vulnerable husband. Marissa, unaware of the eyes watching, sank deeper into the relationship. Khalid spoke of a future where she would no longer struggle, where she could bring her family to Dubai, where she would never again fear unpaid bills or medical shortages. For a girl who had grown up surrounded by scarcity, the dream was intoxicating. She told herself it was love, not dependence. She told herself he meant it when he promised that one day she would no longer have to hide. but Layla was already planning. And unlike Khalid or Marissa, she understood the true rules of survival in Dubai's unforgiving social hierarchy. She would not lose her place, not after 20 years of sacrifice. She would not allow herself to be replaced by someone who had only just arrived with a borrowed suitcase and naive hope. The affair was no longer just betrayal. It was a threat to her very existence. And threats in Layla's world were dealt with quietly, ruthlessly, and without warning. Layla stopped sleeping. She moved through the villa like a ghost, the marble floors whispering under her bare feet as she paced past portraits of charity banquets and ribbon cuttings, the curated proof of a life she had built brick by careful brick. She had files now, folders within folders, labeled by date, location, and device. One held bank transfers marked advance salary and project bonus. Another held stills of Marissa stepping into the Marina apartment elevator at 9:41 p.m., head bowed, badge lanyard tucked into her purse. The most important folder contained video, the office corridor, the private meeting room, the service entrance where Khalid parked when he didn't want the drivers to talk. Proof was not enough. She needed inevitability. She began with a timeline. On her desk, she taped a roll of brown craft paper and drew columns for dates, times, and movements. She traced Khalid's week, office until 11 on Mondays, site visits Tuesdays and Thursdays, Marina apartment most Fridays. She added Marissa's shifts, pulled from HR rosters she had quietly copied. Where their timelines overlapped, she circled in red. Patterns formed like constellations. She marked the pharmacy receipts for Khalid's insomnia medication, 10 milligrams Zolpidem, picked up by the housekeeper every other Wednesday. She marked the evenings he poured whiskey into a cut crystal glass and pretended it helped him think. The plan took shape not as a single stroke, but as a sequence of nudges. First, she replaced the next blister pack of pills with identical-looking tablets she ordered through a contact who sold sleep aids to private clinics. Unregulated, potent, crushingly effective. Then she called a technician, the same one who had installed the office cameras, and asked him to clean up the Marina footage because my husband is being blackmailed. He didn't need details. He scrubbed audio, shifted timestamps by minutes, and tightened the edit around the moments that made Marissa look like the one guiding the night. When he was done, she paid in cash and asked for only the corrected files on a fresh drive. The corrupted originals conveniently left to die on a formatted device. She set her alibi with the elegance of routine. On November 2, 2019, she confirmed a dinner at Jumeirah for a fundraising board. Pre-posted an Instagram story of a table setting with a caption about building futures together, and arranged to sit with two women who would recount her presence later with eager detail. She texted Khalid at 6:12 p.m. "I hope the planning meeting goes well, I'll be home late," and received a thumbs-up reply. At 8:58 p.m., his car GPS pinged the Marina garage. At 9:21, elevator camera, 3rd floor. At 9:37, Marissa. Inside the apartment, the ritual played out as always. The embrace that hovered on the edge of guilt. The groceries unpacked with domestic precision. The laptop opened on financial spreadsheets that had become their private language of a future they weren't allowed to speak aloud. Marissa's heart did the same small sprint it always did when he said her name softly, as if she were the only person in the city who mattered. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey and offered her sparkling water. She declined alcohol. She always did. On the counter, the pill organizer sat like a small, tidy trap. At 10:58 p.m., he took a tablet and swallowed without checking the imprint. At 11:26, he took another, muttering about an early site visit and the need to sleep. Marissa didn't see the second pill. She was in the bedroom folding a shirt he insisted she keep at the apartment, an intimacy that felt like a promise. At 12:04, his speech began to slur. He waved off her concern, said work had bled him dry, said sleep would fix it. She helped him to bed and sat beside him, counting the seconds between breaths like she had learned for her father when his chest rattled in humid Manila nights. The seconds stretched. By 12:41, panic was a creature in her throat. She tried to wake him. His eyelids trembled but did not rise. She dialed emergency services at 12:44, voice fracturing as she gave the address. At 12:53, the building guard opened the door for paramedics. At 12:58, they were in the bedroom. At 1:07, they looked at each other across him. That look professionals share when numbers no longer bend to will. At 1:12, they declared what could not be undone. Police arrived with quiet efficiency. They asked for IDs, for relationship explanations, for keys. They noted the gifts, the second toothbrush, the scent of a woman's lotion. They photographed the pill organizer and the whiskey glass. The duty officer accepted a USB drive from a grieving wife who arrived at 2:03 a.m. Eyes red, hands shaking, voice steady enough to say, "I found these on my husband's private system. I wish I had found them sooner." The edited videos were clean, clinical, cruel. They showed Marissa handling the organizer, leaning over the bed, whispering into Khalid's ear. The sound was gone, so intention filled the silence. At 3:18 a.m., they took Marissa to Al Barsha station to answer questions. She went without resistance, clutching her phone like it might anchor her to the life that was evaporating. Her last text to her mother remained unsent. "Ma, I will call tomorrow. Good news about..." It ended there, the future cut mid-sentence. Interrogation rooms are built to erase a person's edges. The fluorescent light flattens faces, the metal chair leaches warmth. The rectangle table turns confession into geometry. At 9:10 a.m., after a sleepless night, Marissa faced Detective Samir Al-Raimi, a careful man with the practiced neutrality of someone who knows that tone can tilt a life. He began with biography: parents, siblings, salary, remittances. She answered out of habit. These were facts she carried like identification. When the questions curved toward Khalid, how long, how often, what gifts? Her voice thinned but did not break. "I loved him," she said once, as if trying the words in a room that did not allow softness. The autopsy report arrived within 48 hours. Lethal zolpidem concentration combined with alcohol, pulmonary edema, central nervous system depression consistent with overdose. The medico-legal phrasing left doors open: accidental, negligent, intentional. The prosecution would later choose the one with the firmest lock. A toxicologist noted an unusual tablet imprint foreign to the prescription on file, but chain of custody gaps swallowed the detail. The blister pack collected from the apartment matched a batch the housekeeper had picked up. But the individual tablets were not part of any registered lot. In another city, on another case, that might have ignited doubt. In this city, with this victim and this suspect, momentum favored closure. Layla's performance threaded grief with restraint. She met with investigators in abaya and veil, voice low, hands still. She spoke of a husband drifting, of a wife praying, of a secretary who grew too close. She offered the drive with recovered files from his private cloud, apologized for the poor quality, and sat as they watched a narrative she had manufactured. In one clip, time-stamped 11:02 p.m., Marissa appeared to move pills from organizer slots back into a bottle. In reality, That sequence had been cobbled from two different nights, a 3-minute gap shaved and sewn until guilt looked seamless. There were no originals to challenge the stitches. The technician's corruption story, filed in a short memo, became the official explanation. Charges came swiftly: involuntary manslaughter, medical negligence, though she was not a clinician, and fraud tied to the transfers, reframed as coercive benefits. Her court-appointed attorney, a soft-spoken man from Sharjah, argued that the footage bore signs of discontinuity, that metadata inconsistencies suggested edits, that love is not motive by itself. He requested independent forensic analysis. The court noted the cost and declined. He requested the housekeeper's testimony about the pharmacy pickups. She testified, but her memory stumbled under leading questions. He requested Khalid's prior pattern of infidelity to contextualize power dynamics. The judge called it character mud. The trial lasted 27 days. Each morning, Marissa walked past cameras she avoided with an instinct born of shame. Local papers floated headlines that read like verdicts. The prosecution stacked their chapters: the affair, the money, the video, the fatal cocktail. They played a slowed clip of her leaning over Khalid's sleeping body, while a captioned timestamp ticked like a metronome. They called a consultant who explained how untrained hands can mishandle sedatives. They reminded the court that a great man was dead, and someone must answer. On the last day, her attorney tried to cut a window in the sealed room. He projected a frame-by-frame analysis showing micro-jumps where none should exist. Circled shadows that shifted direction between cuts pointed out that the pill organizer's weekday labels reversed in one angle. A continuity error no one had noticed or wanted to. He asked for time to subpoena the technician, who recovered the files. The judge glanced at the docket and said the matter had been fully heard. The gavel's sound was small and absolute. 12 years. Deportation upon completion. An order to repay illicit gains, a sum that exceeded any arithmetic of her life. In the holding cell, she pressed her forehead against cool tile and tried to remember the exact pitch of her mother's laughter on market mornings, the bright clatter of coins, the smell of sliced green mango. She wrote a letter she couldn't send. "Ma, I wanted to make us safe." Time turned viscous. Months later, a private investigator retained by a cousin, a wiry man named Warren Mercado who fixed phones in Dera and knew people who knew people, found a hairline crack. A subcontractor at the security firm, eager to leave for Canada, admitted off the record that he had been paid cash to synchronize files for a client who matched Layla's description. A receipt without a name surfaced from a repair kiosk. External SSD, wiped, same week as the death. None of it met the burden to reopen a case swiftly, but it began to curl doubt at the edges of an official narrative. Layla did not wait to see which way the wind would blow. Within 3 months, she liquidated a tranche of holdings, transferred funds through layered accounts, and enrolled the children at a London school under her maiden name. She sent one final message to a mutual friend: "Please respect our privacy," and then vanished into the soft anonymity money buys. What remained were aftermaths. A villa where the staff spoke in past tense. An office that replaced a framed portrait with another man's grin. A prison routine where Marissa measured days by laundry slots and the angle of sunlight in a courtyard. Somewhere in Quezon City, Alma kept the TV off and learned to carry silence like a sack of rice. Heavy, necessary, uncomplaining. Years later, when a review panel finally agreed to examine the digital chain, they found what Mercado had traced in rumor: non-sequential hashes, timecode anomalies, a camera log with entries that did not exist on the exported files. The decision that followed was bureaucratic rather than cinematic. Sentence reduced for procedural concerns. Credit for time served, immediate deportation. At Ninoy Aquino International, Marissa stepped into air that smelled like diesel and rain and did not feel like home yet. Reporters shouted questions she could not afford to answer. She lifted a small bag and walked toward a family that had waited at the barricade so long their grief had learned patience. Justice never arrived for Khalid. Truth arrived too late for Marissa. Safety arrived only for Layla. In cities built on image, narratives are currency, and the richest story wins. The rest of us are left counting the cost.